What's going on, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered. I'm Peadar Cleary with my co-host here, Ramon Mile.
Hello.
So, coming off the back of last week's episode, we obviously got into a number of pertinent topics for the time we're living in right now. Just working off that, we're going to get into another couple of topics, main topics, one domestic related, obviously, hence the name, and one we're going to focus more on a foreign topic. Before we do that, we are going to run through some quick hits for the week of things that have been in the news and people have been talking about and it's been showing up, and things that, are informative and things we should definitely touch on if we're going to be truly a weekly recap of what's going on. So the first thing, Ramon, do you want to kick it off on kind of what your quick hits for the week are?
Yeah, I'll kick off my first one here. My first quick hit of the day is Kamala Harris earlier in the week traveling to West Virginia to discuss the stimulus bill.
Country road.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, she took a little trip, folks. So the reason that I picked this is more of a, inside politics, soft power type of thing that has a lot of relevance for what the Biden administration, how they're going to, how much muscle they're going to flex going forward. And this was really encouraging for me to see, because this is the type of politics, the use of the bully pulpit that, Bernie Sanders espoused, FDR famously used many times. And the reason that we're talking about flexing muscle here is the Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia had weeks prior, he talked about possibly limiting the stimulus bill to less money. He's been talking $11 minimum wage instead of $15. He's been trying to be a moderating force on the progressive ideas that are launching forward from the Democratic Party currently. Mm-hmm. And, Kamala Harris flew out there and did a press hit in his own state and didn't even tell him, folks. So I love that, because again,
he was heated.
Yeah, he was pissed. I have the quote right here. When asked about VP Harris conducting an interview on his own turf with no heads up, Manchin said, "I saw the interview. I couldn't believe it. No one called me about it. We're going to find a bipartisan path forward. We need to work together." That's not working together.
Sorry, Joe.
Sorry, bucko. So like I said before, obviously the budgetary framework for the stimulus package was passed on yesterday. So that the bill actually has to be written. So again, this her flying out there wasn't a function of whether that was going to pass or not. I think this is just very premonitory for how they could operate as an administration going forward. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. What's your quick hit?
So my quick hit, the first thing I want to talk about on my quick hit is just the recent conversations that we're having within the Republican Party regarding both Marjorie Taylor Greene and Senator Cheney, or Congresswoman Cheney, Liz Cheney. Obviously they're in some turmoil. They weren't able to, get out in front and actually, reprimand Marjorie Taylor Greene regarding her comments and everything that she said and done prior to being a congresswoman, and then also her tone once she came into office and kind of how she's handled herself. What I thought was interesting is Steve King, if you remember, he was stripped of his positions back in 2019 by McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And obviously, the reason being is because he was kind of coddling cozying up to the white supremacist far right. Mm-hmm. Not too far removed from that, we have someone who is espousing QAnon, conspiracy theories. Above that as well, she's, there's videos of her, walking down David Hogg, survivor from the Parkland schools, talking about Jewish lasers starting wildfires in California. Just zany stuff. Absolutely nuts. And she didn't even get a stern talking to publicly.
Right.
And then they had this, closed door caucus with all the members where they did a silent poll. First of all, to see if Liz Cheney was going to stay in, a powerful position within it, which she did overwhelmingly. I think she was confident in that. Mm-hmm. And then they also, Marjorie Taylor Greene got up and spoke. and by all accounts, she got a standing ovation.
Incredible.
And what was also funny was like there was another silent poll in there to see, whether she should be removed or censured. She wasn't. And from by all accounts as well, I don't think it was actually a silent poll. I might be wrong about that. We'll find that out. But from what I heard, Liz Cheney had voted not to censure her as well, even though.
Really? So
that just shows you the identity right now within there is all over the place.
Oh yeah.
And we spoke offline about, there's going to be elections in 2 years or next year.
Yep.
So, they need to do something to kind of figure out who they are a little bit, because they're coddling up to an element that it's a waning element, but at the same time, they're very, very loud. And yeah, I thought that was my first quick hit. I think we had to talk about that just because of how it plays out.
Yep.
And then the flip side of that is they're playing the whataboutism on the conservative side and the conservative media. They're trying to say, well, what about when Ilhan Omar said this, or Rashida Tlaib said that, or look, AOC is pretending that she was in the Capitol building, which that's not what she was saying. She was saying that was a building, and I don't know if anybody heard, but she was on an Instagram live, AOC, and she was speaking about the day where the insurrection happened and how there was a bomb found outside of the adjacent building to the Capitol where she was set up, which I guess the Capitol grounds themselves, has a number of buildings that you would work in as a congressman or a senator. And obviously the right is just trying to flip that and play, pointing fingers back without actually taking responsibility for the mess that is the Republican caucus.
Right, yeah. They're trying to play some weird semantical argument right now where they're like, well, she wasn't actually in the Capitol. And it's like, but her office where she was, there were people banging on the door to get in.
There was thousands of people coming down.
It doesn't matter what fucking building she says she was or wasn't in. It's incredible to me. I mean, and it's just like you said, it's relating to what you said before. It's the Republican Party in crisis, not knowing where it's safe to pivot. Right. They really have no idea. The only thing they have left is nonsense. Right. Because they kind of have to tread water for a little while here until they figure out, is Trump actually going to stay in the woods? Are any of these QAnon people going to vote for me?
The most disturbing comment for the week was, I don't know if you saw it, Matt Gaetz, Beavis himself. Looks like fucking Jack Nicklaus from the Joker right now. His hair is going higher and his smile is getting wider. He said that after Marjorie Taylor Greene spoke, he felt like he needed a cigarette after it.
Wow.
Which is the creepiest imagery that I've ever heard, but I just had to put that in there. Just what a creepy guy.
He's cool.
Figure it out, Republicans. Or don't.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. All
right, what else you got?
All right, so my other quick hit, this pertains to the vote that actually happened yesterday. Reconciliation, but the budget resolution for the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. No, what I found interesting was actually Mitt Romney. So basically yesterday there were about 800 amendments put forward during the entire course of them working on passing this budget outline. And most of it was Republicans just fucking around trying to gum up the works. It took about 15 hours, I believe. It went stretched late into the night. But there was actually some interesting stuff that came out of it on both sides. Just to quickly touch on it. I believe, I can't remember her name, one of the Iowa Republican senators, she tried to stick in a clause that said you cannot raise the minimum wage during the pandemic. That was an interesting one that popped out to me. But the one that I want to focus on here today is Mitt Romney actually proposed a child allowance credit, which is interesting. So for people who've been paying attention, the Democrats actually have been talking about, and it is in the framework that they just passed Friday, but the Democratic plan, what they want to do is they want to take the child tax credit, which is usually $2,000 currently under Trump's tax plan that he changed it, and they want to boost that up to $3,600. But what they're also going to do is make it fully refundable, which means every month you will get 1/12 of what your total allowance would be, depending on how many children you have. So, if you have one child, that's $300 a month. So Mitt Romney actually proposed a competing plan, somewhat interesting. He proposed a $350 child allowance on Thursday. He did before the voting, and it actually got voted on, and it passed with a voice vote. So it's open to be put into the stimulus bill if people so choose when it goes through the House and the Senate. But yeah, so $350 for each child younger than 6, $250 per month for ages 6 through 17 under his proposed Family Security Act. So just a few pertinent facts here about this is, obviously the United States is like one of the only developed countries that doesn't have a child allowance or benefit. Basically all of Europe does. We do not, because we love our tax credits, folks.
Yeah.
Like I said, Democrats proposed one. Theirs would be funded. The Democrat proposal would be funded by the IRS. Romney's would be funded by the Social Security Administration. So this is sort of in the weeds, but Romney's plan is better in that regard, just on delivery, because we all saw how the IRS handled stimulus checks
or anything.
And just anything. Yeah. Not the organization you want delivering money to you. The Social Security Administration has much better experience with it. They delegate to the states as well. Obviously some states have done a poor job handling like unemployment benefits, but to be fair, it's been overwhelming.
Yeah.
But as far as Social Security benefits, I haven't seen any issues with people receiving those. So Romney gets a +1 in his side for that.
Yeah.
Now, the only downfall of the Romneys, which, folks, we're talking about Republican legislation, so they want to take something when they give it, right? So it would have diminishing returns for couples making $400,000 or more, and it caps at $1,250 per month. So what his plan is, what does that come out to? That comes out to 4 children you can have at the most, and you'd cap out at $1,250. And I don't know, that 400,000 mark seems a little high to me. Now, I'm usually for universal programs, but a $400,000 family income, it could probably come down a little bit.
Be right.
Like $250, something like that. But I'm not gonna go crazy on.
How has it been received? Have you had any?
So yeah, it actually received quite a bit of Democratic support. Like I said, all reports. Obviously, there was no video of that moment, I don't think, because or at least I couldn't find any. But according to all reports, a lot of Democrats in the voice vote seemed like it was a good plan, or it seemed like they liked that plan. Romney's plan would cut child poverty by 33%. Great. The Democratic plan would cut it by 39%. So now, just the last thing to cap off the quick hit here. The interesting thing about Romney's plan, the takeaway part I mentioned earlier, is that his plan fully refunds the child tax credit. But it disallows you from itemizing your it disallows you from using state and local deductions when you file your federal tax returns. So it's a bit complicated, for a lot of people who don't do their own taxes and just, hand it off to H&R Block or whatever. But, your tax guy will tell you that that's important for a lot of people, especially people in New York who live like downstate, New York City. That's a huge deduction. Trump actually he capped the state and local deduction to $10,000 in his tax plan. That hurt a lot of people downstate. So Romney's plan would eliminate any use of state and local tax deduction. And those are only used by people who itemize or, typically who are self-employed people, contractors, things like that. But so here's the kicker. If Joe Biden, how he's been saying he wants to repeal some of Trump's tax cut, if he doesn't take out that $10,000 cap, Romney's plan is actually better than the Democrat plan, according to my math here. Right. Could be wrong, depending on, they can change it however they want. But
lots of ways to skin a cat.
Right. So as far as I see the breakdown right now, Mitt Romney, like we talked about last week, he's continuing to try to position himself as, hey, I actually, and he has done somewhat in the past, tried some decent bipartisanship. Maybe that's because of, where he comes from, his family values, things like that. He actually does seem to have an honest ethic toward supporting American families. So it's refreshing.
Yeah. He's more of a traditional, or at least he seems to espouse what the Republicans would call traditional Republican values, right? Whereas a lot of the party right now are all over the place. And it's like, what is going on there? So, yeah. And what's funny about, just to kind of cap off that discussion, is anytime Republicans and Democrats are fighting over spending, it's always about, that's too much money, this, that, and the other. But if you look at it historically, Republican presidents have always driven up the deficit more than Democratic presidents. I have some numbers here. Like Reagan took the deficit from 70 billion to 175 billion. Bush 41 to 300 billion. Clinton got it to zero. Bush 43 took it from 0 to 1.2 trillion, and Obama halved it to 600 billion. Trump had it back to $1 trillion. So when we have these discussions, Democrat, Republican about spending, their legs are cut right away because all the things that they introduce a lot of the times don't always pan out for the betterment of the American, deficit.
Right.
So
yeah, and it's interesting too because the other side of that, that economic data model is GDP growth,
right?
Which is interesting because it flies directly in the face of this fiscal responsibility claim that the Republican Party tries to make. Because so what they do is they cry when Democrats are in power and say you're spending too much. Then a Republican comes in and spends his ass off. And then they're like, oh, look at how well the markets are doing.
Right.
But folks, believe me. I mean, we listened to Trump literally for 4 years. Just
the stock market.
Yeah, just, jerk himself off talking about how great he's been for the markets. And it's like, yeah, well, what do you think is going to happen when you literally just slash corporate tax rate in half? Of course, the fake GDP, like the market is going to do great.
Yep.
So it's just, people just have to pay attention and like actually look at the numbers to understand what's happening there.
So the last quick hit that I want to talk about is the recent coup that happened in Myanmar. The leader there who was voted into power, a woman, Nobel Peace Prize winning woman, she had some bad press over the last 2 years, basically because of the way that they've treated the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, which got her out of the favors of the majority of the world community. But they just had an election there where they won by a landslide. Over 80% of the votes went to them. And the military in Myanmar were crying foul. Long story short, the military general went on TV, and like you see in most coups, and said,
we are the state now.
Yeah, we are the state now. She's been arrested. At least initially there wasn't much pushback from supporters for her, but I've been reading that more and more people are taking to the streets and really pushing back on this. What is interesting though about all this is I think the military are always there in the shadows, and I wonder how much of a part they played in with the kind of the Rohingya stuff, and were they just allowing her to be the kind of figurehead while they were actually the power within that country. Yeah. And maybe she just outran her necessity within the country, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And the reason I say we've seen instances of it as well is because the same things that the voter fraud claims that the general and that element is talking about is kind of the same type of stuff that we saw Trump and the Republicans talking about prior to January 6th. So there seems to be a modus operandi for these coups where they cry foul on the election and then try to, enforce a will once the votes are counted and represented. So it appears that, the UN, oversaw the election. They saw no foul play. There was independent adjudicators who said the same thing. But a lot of countries like China were saying it was an internal matter. I think America has taken that same posture. They've talked about maybe sanctions, but I think, again, unfortunately for Myanmar, like I said, formerly Burma, that's been a hot place for the last 40, 50 years in terms of that power struggle. And bringing democracy was brought about by this woman leader, who, again, I'm not going to try to pronounce her name and do it a disservice, but we'll see how that plays out. Like I said, more and more of her supporters have come out to the streets, unions and whatnot. But it's tough to see without international support for her. She's in jail, so we'll see.
It's sort of interesting to see how countries that don't have any significant, role to play in the global market kind of just get left alone. you know, that like it's amazing. And, you know, like what you were saying earlier, the, you know, like the military's kind of always been in her shadow, like during her entire reign and her parties in general. It's almost like it reminds me of like Turkey's shadow government, you know, that Erdogan was, you know, opposing Erdogan from, you know, from his inauguration and all the way through till now. You know, all the reports you see of that where there's just like, there's literally just like some shadow organization that has like judges, police officers, all these people who like this odd, weird deep state thing. But the difference here in Myanmar is it's almost like the military, you know, junta that you could call it that, you know, took her out of power is a party itself.
Yeah,
it's really interesting to see that this sort of outlier that isn't necessarily involved in the democracy of the country, but can just step in and like Big Brother at any moment.
I know.
And it seemed like kind of everyone knew like that was kind of happen at some point. The way that you hear reporters from in country talk about it, really weird and interesting. I had a hard time trying to gather more information on like what intra-party politics, like what led up to this,
why they felt they needed to oppose her so much,
right? And it's really interesting, like because most coups you see, like there's always like some like NGO, like some non-governmental organization that like it serves as the relay between like the West and the country's government. But none of that happened here. It was just this really odd, just like muted coup.
and I think that's kind of a bit of a hangover from the bad PR the country had got from how they dealt with the Rohingya problem. And I think that's at least my take on it is, you know, because that happened, people were far less involved in what Suu Kyi had to say, the leader, and now this military element have taken over. And I don't know, you know, what. It's always funny, and the reason I say we'll probably talk about this again is, you know, we talked offline about, you know, just coups in general and how, you know, over over history they've played out. So many different things are happening when a coup happens. You know, we saw the attempted coup in Turkey, like you said, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe less.
A prolonged one, really.
Yeah. We saw a different style of coup with Evo Morales. We've seen instances in Brazil. And for
with Lula,
and for lack of a better, you know, word to call what happened on January 6th, not so much a military coup, but you know, you the elements there and a person going out of power who was talking about voter fraud.
Right.
I wonder if he did ever get any backing from the military, if he would potentially want to have done the same thing. Interesting to think of. You know, like I said, we're not too far removed from something crazy happening.
Right. Well, no, people in the State Department, you know, in their testimony when, you know, congressional investigations first began into the insurrection, that was a lot of their response. If you see a lot of their personal correspondence back and forth with one another on that day, when, you know, talking about National Guard authorization and stuff, it was in the documents where they were saying they were hesitant to mobilize a lot of elements because they were concerned that Donald Trump might redirect or try to take charge of it. So that was a very real thing. And it's honestly, it's interesting too, like just the whole the social dynamic of coups in general and the way that it's sort of like, you know, you could argue that we had a tiny attempted one here. And the way that the divide is so stark when these things happen in a country. And like you were saying, that's what was fascinating about Myanmar, because it's like it wasn't that apparent. You know what I mean? Normally there's like a hard line drawn between at least two or more factions of what actually happened and what they want the international community to understand. We're not really getting much of that.
No, not at all. So that was my quick hit. As I said, we'd like to get into more and really delve into, you know, coups over the course of you know, modern history and talk about that more in depth. I think it'd be a really interesting topic to delve into. All right, let's get into our first main topic. So, do you want to lead it off?
Yeah, I'll kick it off here. So our domestic topic for the week is just the general discourse on school reopening and the role that labor actually plays in some opposition to that right now in our country. So yeah, I have here to start off with, just in general, like to open this topic, I think that it's important to discuss, obviously like what the science says, what scientists are saying from the data that we have. We have almost a full year's worth of data of, seeing the effect of spread rate in communities and how that has translated to transmission rate inside of schools. So, the CDC actually has been releasing quite a bit of guidance on this across the last 7 days or so, commenting a lot in the media, but they put out some pretty solid documentation of what they think that schools should refer to, school administration and systems should refer to, whether they should be open or not, opening or not, and then staying reopened in the future as case rates rise and fall throughout the coming months here. So yeah, the CDC released guidance to open schools safely and quickly as possible, referring to several studies showing how transmission rates amongst K through 12 children are actually quite low. And like I said, they add that school officials should make the ultimate decisions about opening and staying open for in-person learning based on the CDC's, quote, indicators for dynamic decision making. So this is a chart that they released. I have some of the data here. It basically shows a spread. It's a spreadsheet that's showing whether schools should stay open, like low risk to moderate risk to high risk to extreme risk. And it's the first table is based off of case rate per 100,000 of the population. And then there's several other factors, such as, is the school adhering to its masking policy? Is there extra ventilation in the school added? There's a bunch of different factors. But the key one there that we're going to probably refer to and address quite a bit is obviously the most important one of what is the positivity rate in the community. Yeah. That's obviously paramount to, whether a school should be open or not. So, yeah. And then another interesting data point that's germane to, understanding where you should fall on this discourse, because again, this really is kind of shaking out as a public opinion thing. This isn't really because there's an interesting dynamic at play here when you talk about, obviously, like we all understand and know that socialization in schools are important. Children need that interaction with their peer groups on top of just children have been falling behind academically in this country for quite some time now. A very important point that the CDC makes is, teachers and children are not currently among priority groups for vaccination, which is obviously important when you're considering, how much transmission could happen in a school. And like I said, kids aren't in that priority pool, and neither are teachers. And much of the discourse coming from the federal government, as far as funding that's attached to the stimulus bill and out of Biden and Psaki's mouth the last couple weeks here, is that they keep referring to advanced ventilation infrastructure playing a huge role in school safety, but nothing's been specifically allocated for that purpose exclusively in any of these bills that have been written. So I find that very interesting, because it seems like that's sort of we all keep rounding back to that, where we're talking about, increased ventilation. There's a lot of data that shows that, that has extreme efficacy. But, unfortunately, a lot of that stuff costs a ton of money. Schools are underwater. I know us here locally in Schenectady County, upstate New York, a lot of other counties laid off a ton of teachers, support staff, etc. So like I said, if there isn't anything exclusively tied to this bill for infrastructure funding, and it's not just like, the testing obviously is going to have to be increased to ensure positivity rate is low in the school and other such things, I think there needs to be a specific
blanketed guidance.
It needs to be addressed specifically so that schools can have that money separate from their other fiscal needs to be able to upgrade their ventilation systems.
Right. I mean, the thing about schools and school systems and the education system in general is that it's so integral to all other parts of society. And I'm a father, you're a father. In terms of having to, worry about your kid in school or being looked after while you're going about your day and doing your job is a big thing that I think is why there's more and more pressure into opening the schools. I mean, the schools should be the last thing to close, the first things to open when we can. You know what I mean? If we can operate like that, that's the way it should be, just because of what it does, obviously for kids. What I thought was interesting, and a number I found quite interesting was the transmission rates in the age groups. So in the 0 to 9 age group, the estimated transmission rate was 2.1%, which is about 12.1% of the population. And then 10 through 19 was 4%. The highest groups that would be transmitting are 20 to 34 and 35 to 49. Again, they're not school age. 34.7% and 41.1%, respectively. So I think as a priority, and I know that the CDC have started talking about that, some of the mitigating efforts such as getting masks, proper PPE, and let's focus on getting teachers and educators the vaccine as soon as it's available. Because until then, you can have hybrid models. You know, you can, I guess I'm lucky, my daughter's about to be 6. So she's in, kindergarten. It's not as a priority for me to get her to school. I'd rather wait till schools and the federal government kind of figure out what's the best plan and approach. But obviously those kids who are 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, it's more integral. And you're seeing, more and more reports of the amount of kids who are dealing with mental health issues because they don't have that. Playing into that as well is just, economically what schools can offer. Like we saw in New York City, they're a big factor into getting kids fed, looking after children, being able to monitor how a child is getting treated at home by them going to school. So there's so many different things that play into it. And like I said, these teachers, they're teachers, but they're also parents as well. So in terms of, everybody wants the schools open, that goes without saying, but doing it safely, I think at least with this administration, they are, looking at it as a priority in order to do that safely, not just open, which the last government were talking about opening it, and the Republicans are still talking about opening it, but opening it the right way so they can stay open and not just turn it into another clusterfuck. You know?
And I think so this sort of, this will fold us into the next portion of this topic is, so you, on one hand, you have school administrators, right? They're receiving maximum pressure from their state and federal governments, probably not so much from local, but they're being told you need to open, you need to open, you need to open. And what I referred to before, where a lot of this is coming down to public policy polling, it's sort of been all over the place the last 11 months. But for the most part, all the data I've seen for public policy polling for parents on whether they want schools to be opened or not, about 40% of parents want the option to continue to virtually learn to be left on the table.
Yeah.
So, and that's another huge thing, right? So we keep coming back to funding. How is this stimulus fund, education funding, going to get allocated? Is it going to get, are you just going to drop a huge splash of money in the lap of all these local school districts? Or is it going to be, highwayed? Is it going to be laned where it's you can only spend it here or there? Because first of all, like you said, in that hybrid model instance, which I agree with you, that would probably be the smartest way to do it, especially when you're talking about school districts in counties that have, 6% or higher transmission rates still, which the CDC considers a moderate to high risk. Anything above 5%, they consider moderate to high. Anything above 8 is high. And the reason that this is important, folks, and what makes this sort of really interesting dynamic with this pandemic and what's been going on as far as labor rights go, is you have this obvious need for children to be educated. And, like we said offline, let's keep it real. The public education system is daycare in some regard for a lot of people, especially working class folks who wouldn't be able to afford any type of childcare otherwise. And I'm not saying that as if in any mean way that's the way the parents think about it. No, that's functionally what it is. That is what it is. When your kid's 4 and you're at home with your kid and you can't afford pre-K because it's not free in your area or you didn't get in a program, your kid's home with you. Then he turns 5, he goes to kindergarten, he's gone. You can work different hours. It frees you up to do many things.
Absolutely.
It's a very integral part of the American economy. It compared to other nations. But so when you bring labor in, it's interesting because the school teachers unions around the country, depending on where you're talking about, and the perfect example I want to bring up here is Chicago. because they have all throughout early January, all the way through the end of the month. They've been hovering around. They were at a 10% positivity rate for all testing, basically for the first 3 weeks of January. Then it dipped down to 7% last week. That's on a 7-day rolling average, right? So you have, again, like I said, school administrators, city officials. Mayor Lori Lightfoot has been demanding that the teachers union report to work. That she first launched the demand at the end of the year last year and said, you all must report to work January 4th. The teachers union came forward and said, our 7-day rolling average is 10.1% right now. We're not reporting to work. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Because they were pushing much what the CDC has said, the Biden administration saying that we need infrastructural ventilation upgrades. Yeah. We need funding for more increased testing. And Chicago is one amongst many of the many large school systems where this is a huge fiscal strain, where if you want to do, like, say, rapid testing or a lottery testing system just to make sure, like, hey, how many people are positive in this school system, it costs a lot of money. Not to mention, we have a supply side issue where testing's not that available, folks. It still isn't. Right. Okay, so obviously we're going to blame dipshit Trump and Pence and Operation Warp Speed. What a joke. Yeah. You know, they fucked around for a whole year and still didn't have it figured out. Yeah. You know, Biden's not invoking the War Production Act. So who knows how that's going to, we're at the mercy of the markets in that regard. Yeah. But when you talk about workplace safety and these teachers in the Chicago Teachers Union, who, you know, are still threatening strike, they've been in talks back and forth with the Chicago public school system. You know, the school system keeps offering them ultimatums, basically saying, hey, if you don't report, it's going to be a lockout. So, and this is the real crazy part, right? The polling in Chicago is that 60% of parents don't want their kids to go back to school because they're living in it, folks. Yeah. Here's the difference. This is what I just said to you offline earlier, is everybody wants federal daddy, Uncle Sam, to come in and solve this problem. This is inherently a local issue. This isn't something that the federal government can set a complete blanket guidance on. I'm sure you've heard all these federal officials repeating the same thing. Everyone understands that. But the problem is they're the one who has to turn the faucet on. They have to know where to point the water and how fast to push it out of the hose. And it seems like nobody wants, especially people that are in positions like, you know, mayors, school board administrators. Nobody wants to stick their neck out.
Well, it's funny because one of the things I was going to talk about on this, and it works well with what you're talking about, that's happening in Chicago, is, I don't know if you saw this recently, the city of San Francisco filed a lawsuit against its own school district on Wednesday to try and reopen schools as the coronavirus, persists. Mm-hmm. Now, why that matters is the suit alleges that San Francisco school board's reopening plan violates a California mandate requiring districts to adopt a clear procedure to offer classroom-based instruction wherever possible during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess why it matters is, the board, they have had, what they're saying is they've had 10 months to roll out a concrete plan, the Board of Education, to get these kids back to school. So far, they've earned an F, really, in having a plan that just doesn't cut it. So I don't know if this is going to be something that you're going to see more of as the issue persists. Mm-hmm. Is this something that Chicago would adopt? It's kind of...
I don't know. I mean, well, because honestly, Chicago's the inverse of the situation. The majority of parents there do not want... for example, Mayor Lori Lightfoot was, again, she said, hey, on Monday this week, she was saying, if you don't report, there's a lockout. So there was actually what they called a student sick out. The parents staged on Tuesday that week where they didn't report their children for virtual learning in support of the teachers union. Yeah. So that's why I love this example of Chicago, because it's a clear case of where you have high positivity rate. You have a very strong teachers union. I believe they have a 400,000 student school system, which is the 4th largest in the country, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So that teachers union has a significant amount of power. And, in my opinion, hey, it's a good thing because it's precedent setting for what people need to understand, which is, yes, the education system is so important. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you have teachers, for example, in this one article I read where, this gentleman his wife is a stage 4 breast cancer patient currently, and he's being ordered to return to work. And they haven't changed anything from when they were last in there. The only thing they have is mask policy, wash your hands, social distancing, and they want to return to full class sizes. They're not talking about a hybrid regime here. They want to return it. And another thing is, obviously, you know, Chicago, just like New York City, which, you know, we consume that news all the time. Yeah. It's very important to get those kids in school. You're talking about some areas of these neighborhoods. Kids are way safer in school.
Right.
They're receiving a ton of their nutrition through these school systems, which I think New York has done a admirable job of having auxiliary support systems while they've been closed to still feed children and things like that. Yeah. So that hats off to them in that regard.
Yeah.
But again, it's this interesting, unspoken debate that it never happens where. You have guys like Ben Shapiro, for example, when you bring up like Medicare for all. Oh, my wife's a doctor. So what, you're going to force her to like perform services for a person who can't afford it? Yeah. Okay, so I make your argument back at you, my boy. You're going to force these people who have comorbidities to go and work in a school district where there's no safety protocol for them.
Yeah. And
they don't have the option to teach virtually if they want. They're being told to go brick and mortar in a classroom full of kids. And they could die if they catch this. That's a real problem. And this just shows how far our country has come from, the golden age that our, grandfathers and great grandfathers fought for, the 8-hour workday, workplace safety conditions, the creation of OSHA, things in that regard. OSHA fined one company this entire pandemic. Unfucking believable. Yeah, no, literally, go look it up. They fined one company. That's after stories of all these meatpacking companies that were placing bets on how many of their fucking workers were going to die. I mean,
not surprised.
Shit's out of control as far as consumer protection, labor protection in this country. And it's a good thing that we still have some unionized public sectors that are at least able to, stiffen up a little bit and force federal and state governments to adhere to some of their demands that ultimately will make the students and teachers safer.
Well, I mean, just to put a dot on that point, like America in general has some of the worst, policy when it comes to protecting workers' rights.
Oh, yeah.
As a developed country, as one of the, I guess, major countries in the world. And it's funny that you mentioned OSHA as only one person on that.
One fine. And it was small. It was like 10 grand.
Well, what I did see that I think is an integral part to, opening schools and opening schools safely is, at least in the American Rescue Plan, Biden is bringing more data into the conversation. So when it comes to stage opening, whether hybrid opening, whatever it is, they'll use the numbers that are there. Because when you talk about pandemic and things spreading and risk and all these different things, it's a numbers game. Mm-hmm. The way that these things mutate and the numbers gain and the amount of people that are infected gain, it's the numbers tell the story. You know what I mean? So if they can figure out a plan to open safely, it's going to be difficult. We have these examples, but we have been going through this now for over a year. So, the needle is going to have to move. And, like I said, as a father of a 6-year-old, it's something that I'm obviously thinking about, but I'm in no rush to bring her back to in-person schooling if it's not set up correctly.
Right.
And maybe I'm lucky in the sense that I don't feel like she's missing out too much. We're lucky in that we have, a computer that works. We have internet that works. We have a room for her to be there, But I see kids, and I'm sure there's far worse situations where I see kids that they're on their bed or, they have spotty internet or
right.
And integral parts of, a kid's learning and development, is this going to be something that's going to burn them for a while and they'll have to shake it off and it'll hamper their learning for a while? So it is such a tricky subject because, like I said, it's tied into so much that we do as a functioning society and having our kids looked after and educated. The last thing I'll say on it, though, is the success stories of virtual learning, virtual teaching. Is it something where we have to have a hard look as a society now to say, how we educate our kids? Does it necessarily always have to be, 100% of the time in the classroom, or is the ability to be able to tune into a classroom at a hybrid model where you have kids in the class, let's say the kid can't make it that day or whatever it is,
Right.
can they sign on virtually and be in class as well?
Yeah, they could do like one of those, what is it? All the sports venues where they just have like the guy on a screen sitting in a seat, right? Well, and that's the thing. I agree. I mean, like during the research through all this, I saw there was somewhere around like 8% of all students who were in districts that had closed, no in-person schooling. A ton of the parents, 8% of the children actually joined learning pods. So they had like 3 or 4 or 5 kids, and a teacher from their district met them in person. Cool. So it kept it small, and it was cool. And it was interesting because, for some teachers, like for example, in like the Chicago school district, like if those teachers that get locked out, what that means, folks, is they get no pay.
Right.
They get no money. And that happened all over the country. I mean, imagine how, right-wing states, are you kidding me, dude? Like, They have no problem doing shit like this, not to mention the amount of teachers that were laid off, people having issues with unemployment, all these types of things. And some teachers genuinely want, they're out there in their community, they want to do this work. And parents were, created this new, I'm sure it's not a new thing, but on the scale that it happened at, where you have these learning pods, I think that's also an interesting model where, you have like right-wingers that have been pushing like school voucher programs and things like that. Hey, maybe we're at this point where in our civilization where, like you said, we're looking at new ways to do things. Maybe that we can do some studies on these learning pods, see how effective that is.
Yeah.
Because that's almost like, that reminds me of, like ancient Greece where they had like, vocal learning where a guy just sat around and talked all day. That's what they do. He'd have like 4 or 5. Yeah, 4 or 5 guys or girls, whoever, probably guys. I'm sure they weren't doing it with women back then.
Right.
Where, they just sat around, they learned, and it was a small cohort, and they had tight knit relationships that, went deeper than, I remember being in classes in Schenectady, 35 people, and we all know how ineffective that is, having classrooms that large. The weight that puts on the teacher.
That's what I was going to say to that point, is that like some of these class sizes are massive and kids can feel like they're lost and they're falling behind. If you can, break them down into smaller pods like that, I think that's a great idea. Plus, not to mention the fact that, there's so many different ways to learn. I mean, this is a good opportunity to look at education on a whole and kind of, figure out some things.
Right. Yeah, and that's like that learning pod. I know that a lot of people were, adapting like the Montessori methods and stuff like that. There was a lot of interesting things I read coming from all this. But I think just the last thing I want to say on it is, regardless of what, like especially these large school districts like Chicago Public Schools and, LA, New York City, I think that it's very important that at the very least they try to negotiate with these teacher unions in a way where it's like, hey, we have our issues. We're going to fight back and forth on them, whatever, largely because of funding. But, in the meantime, let's figure out if we can have some sort of detente position on like, special needs children, very at-risk students. I would like to see some sort of negotiation with these in these scenarios where it's like, these kids who absolutely need somewhere to be. You can at least figure something out while, clashing on the main issues of, just the regular school kids.
Yep.
I'd like to see that. And that, it's unfortunate because I saw a lot of testimony of there's a ton of, special needs children where think of how disruptive that is. You know what I mean? We're going on almost a year now where you have parents at home who aren't trained to deal with these things, very young children.
Still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine it, man. My kids are probably going to enter school this year, so we'll see. But
good luck.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah, well, I'm hopeful too. And like I said, I guess we're lucky in the sense that we can kind of watch it play out a little bit. Like I'm not in a rush to send my daughter to in-person class and see how that affects. I'd rather them figure it out, and then when it is safe to be, and not just safe for her, safe for the teachers as well. You know what I mean? Because kids are spreaders. They're not the most clean, at least at a young age. Well, I guess the last point I'll make, promise, is we're talking basically about public schools and obviously elementary, high schools, whatever. Universities, once they open those and open them fully, which, a lot of them are in a hybrid model, those kids are paying a lot of money for these online courses. I know at the start of the pandemic they were talking about how like the cheek of this this university to charge $42,000 when everything is completely online.
Yeah.
It's like they have some things to figure out too.
How do you even do labs and stuff?
That was nuts. The fact that they thought they could do that, which I mean,
they paid. People
they
paid.
paid. They probably did. Yeah.
Well, you get that Harvard stamp on your degree. That's really what you're paying for. That's what you're paying for, folks. Yeah. Oh man.
All right, you want to take a little, like 5 minute?
Yeah, sure.
Or 2 minute? Cool. All right, and the second issue and topic that we are going to talk about is the farmers' protests that are happening in the second biggest country in the world population-wise, which is India, right? They're the second biggest?
I believe so, yes.
Another billion person country. The reason that this is such an incredible protest to see when you look at it from a labor movement is, we've talked about numbers with this, and something like 60% of the population are working in and around the agricultural economy within India, which is incredible. It only makes up for about 15% of their economy, but that dynamic with what is happening, and we'll kind of give you a summation on what has been changing and why these farmers are taken to the streets, is a recipe a little bit for disaster. So the big first thing is we'll talk about the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill itself, the way that the farmers go to market currently is they go to these government-led markets where they sell their products. What this new Farm Bill is doing is it's bringing in basically corporate interests and more of a private aspect to it, where they'll be selling not only to government entities but also to private. What the farmers see is going to happen, and my reading of it and understanding of it, is that they're going to end up getting priced out and really drive a lot of them, out of business, hungry, and just really low cost for what they're selling. The interesting dynamic is obviously, we talked about the sheer amount of numbers of farmers that are in India. 60% of 1.6 billion. You do the math.
Incredible.
On that. These are already people who are, poorer. They're struggling through a pandemic. And the way that this farm bill was pushed through, there was no time for debate. And it was just a shocking thing to happen to them. We've seen support online through Rihanna brought attention to it this week, as well as Greta Thunberg, which the anti-protest movement were burning effigies of both of those, which, anytime you see one of those happening, you're like, oh, no, they're burning of an effigy.
Yeah, Modi's party, BJP, yeah, they don't fuck around.
No, they wear all orange. That's the color that they use. They're a Hindu nationalistic type of party as well, which interestingly enough, where the heavy regions of farming is in northern India, which Modi has won quite comfortably. This is probably the biggest, social discourse or national discourse that has happened since he came into power. And it's something that it looks like the protests are working. They've kind of pumped the brakes on a lot of the stuff, the legislation that was pushed through. But I don't really see an end in sight right now. They're camped out in New Delhi. Some of the major cities are really clogging up things. One of the interesting things as well is the farmers themselves. They're important to his base, like I mentioned.
And they carry supplementary support along with as they go with the rest of the population as well, which is important.
And it's coming at a time when the country's economy has tanked. There's been social strife, as widened there.
Yeah.
They're discriminatory. They're discriminatory as F. And the country has been questioned over its response to the pandemic as well. So he's been a bit of a Teflon Don for quite a while, Modi, but this will really strain his perception within his own party. But it seems like they're with him, but more so the people that have voted for him. You're talking about Modi's base here and the farmers,
Right.
And you brought up an interesting point in that they kind of skipped over a part and just opened it up to the private sector for this.
Yeah,
without really bringing in that federal aspect to it.
Well, yeah, that's the interesting thing, right? Is like what you were saying earlier is that a lot of their farming market is controlled by the state. But when we say that, we mean the states within India. The federal government actually has quite a has had a hands-off position on the agribusiness market. And now, so the main three demands of the protest are they're trying to get Modi and BJP to abandon the set of three September 2020 laws they put in last year, which actually will minimize the entire government's role in the agribusiness sector, opening up for private investment and inevitably control, leaving the farmers and their own elected leadership powerless, or very close to powerless. And the main one of the main issues that the farmers have with this set of bills is one of them actually will eliminate what they call the minimum support prices, which is very important. So that's basically the subsidies that these states give to the farmers when there's crop failure or loss from disaster and things like that. And Americans can relate very much to that, especially here in New York. I mean, if you look up the dollars of subsidies that just apple orchards get in New York, it's incredible. So this isn't a unique thing to India. Every country does it. We do it in our meat industry. Every country now in the modern globalized market subsidizes their food to some degree for in-country production because it keeps prices low. It's one of the mechanisms to fight inflation.
Right.
And that's why this is going to be interesting because Modi is essentially ceding control with these contracts he wants to open up for private investment. And the way that I read it from everything that I've read about it so far is it seems like Modi's, like I said, he's trying to enter India into that global market because, such a huge portion of their workforce is in the agriculture sector. They're trying to open it up. And an interesting article I read, it said that the World Trade Organization actually was resisting a lot of the deals that Modi was trying to make and entering global markets with agriculture, just simply due to the fact that there were too many laws that you can't have certain laws in your country for agriculture to enter certain sectors of the World Trade Organization,
right?
Regardless of what the sector is.
You have to play by the rules.
Yeah, you have to play. Yeah. Yep, exactly. You have to adhere to because basically what they're trying to do is they want you to deregulate your markets so that multinationals can move in and enter you into that global market.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing here in this situation is this economy is so lopsided to agribusiness that most of the farmers, and I think they're correct, see this as a death blow to them.
Yeah.
They're losing sovereignty over their livelihoods. And, we saw that here in America when we were younger. I'm 30. I remember hearing about that all the time in the 90s. People were talking about how like Walmart and all these huge big box stores and giant grocery retailers, like huge chains and stuff, signing these contracts with these giant agriculture companies that were buying up farms all across America. I mean, it's been happening.
Macro farms are the death of the modern American farm.
Exactly. And the thing is, it's interesting to see how like Americans, we didn't have this cultural crisis over it because our economy is very diversified.
Right.
We still had some decent industrial strength back then. I mean, it was way better than it is now when, a lot of small farms are being decimated. So it wasn't as big of a deal, especially for people on the coast. No one gave a shit, A lot of the middle of the country got obliterated by it. But here in India, it's so disproportionate that it is a national issue. It's right to the forefront.
Well, an interesting thing that's happening through all this as well is that, there's been talks between the farmers and the governments, but the farmers' unions rejected an amended government proposal last week. So it's not like the government is not hearing them and trying to do things. the farmers know what they want, and tip of the hat to the unions, they also know what they want. We're under no illusions either that there needs to be some reforms in the way this is done, just because of how lopsided things are. But it's going to be something that they've been protesting in the northern parts of India. It's really gathered momentum since they came to New Delhi. Talking about massive cities. Mm-hmm. So will we be having the same conversation next week? Will there be any movement on it? I haven't even looked up. I don't know when the next election is planned in India. Could look it up right now. But is he going to try, win these guys back with some sort of, concession or legislation? I don't know.
I think this is fascinating because, like we said, Modi's party is ultra nationalist, and really what these farmers are doing is nationalist. Modi's he's trying to globalize one of their main labor markets. Like, it's really interesting to see these dynamics at play here, because they're trying to maintain sort of an isolationist role here. They're like, if you hear and you see all these press hits of these different union leaderships throughout India, especially in the north, they're basically saying like, hey, we want to determine our own destiny here. Mm-hmm. They're not accustomed to having the federal government fiddling in their affairs.
Yep.
And like you said, I completely agree. Like, obviously you can look at these numbers here. Like, what is it? 14% of the Indian population is hungry, and 68% of the country lives in poverty. So obviously if more than 60% of your population is in the agribusiness and people are still hungry, obviously this system that has been in place is ineffectual. Right. Obviously. There needs to be some reform in that regard, but I don't think the solution is to just let multinational faceless corporations come in and start dictating prices and subsidies. And that's the biggest part that I see them pushing back on, is they're worried that they are going to lose the ability to, set market pricing for what a farmer will receive when there's been flooding, there's been drought there. And like we said before, that's critical, especially when, moving forward in this climate change era we're in. That's a real thing, folks. A lot of these people, more than half of the farmers have less than 2 hectares of land there. So that's, in American terms, that's 5 acres. Yeah. Those are small farms.
Yeah.
So you're talking about one flood just wiping someone out, and that's it if they don't have, their support that they're used to from their unions and these subsidies,
right, and
that they negotiate.
I wonder as well as the strain of, I guess the strain is an incorrect word, but the pressures of having to adhere to certain climate policies, how that will affect a country where 60% of people are involved in agriculture.
Right. I haven't seen no one on either side. I haven't seen anyone bring that up. And it's sort of like what we were just talking about offline about this, is it's the economy is second world in that nature, where it's so lopsided toward agriculture. So it's like, how do you even try to, with this level of poverty, it's very difficult to try to shift to do climate friendly policies, because your economy has to be able to absorb that shock of transition. Yeah. So it's like, how do you do that? And, most people who are, at the heights of this industry, global agriculture will tell you, corporations help solve some of that. You get different types of, GMO seeds that can resist long drought and things like that, that can increase crop efficacy. But the problem is there's always caveats that come along with that, or rather, little riders where you have to grow what they want you to grow. Yeah. You have to use this type of all these standards that they set, that if you can't exist within, then you're out.
Well, that played out, and it continues to play out in the EU, and each country member state in the EU has to adhere to certain policies within their food production, agriculture, and all that. And it's not a terrible thing. You have your critics to it, fish quotas and different quotas with that. But for the most part, in my opinion, it works well. Mm-hmm. Would the influx of corporations into this process for India be totally terrible? Maybe not, but I don't think the way that they implemented this legislation in India and rushing it through without really having the debate with 60% of the population was the best way to go about it. Right. It clearly needs reform because it's lopsided. It clearly needs to... But the crazy thing about India is, for a long time, people were bullish on the Indian economy just because of how fast it was changing. When you talk about going from a second world, third, going through those stages, this has been the first time I've actually had a good look at, what is their economy made up of? The fact that we keep talking about 60%, which is just insane.
It really is.
What is that change going to be to kind of make it more of a balanced, or at least a tenable balanced situation there?
Right. And I think a lot of that speculation you were talking about, like people being bullish on them, a lot of that's cooled off. That was because of the tech boom. That a lot of that is cooled off from the beginning of the decade. I would guess, just from looking at their projections for GDP, and it still is continuing the way that even Modi's own assessments through 2025, it's still going to be somewhere around their labor, not necessarily the GDP. The GDP can fluctuate depending on wherever the government subsidizes, but as far as the labor market, when you have hunger at that level and that many people are farmers, it's just, you have to I don't know how you fix that, to be honest. This is a giant issue. But I know that one of the other things that was really weird that I read in the other one of these 3 laws, I can't remember which one it was in, but they were attempting to change what essential, so certain food items that these farmers would grow would qualify for different levels of subsidy depending on what food it was. And they were trying to, in one of these laws, drop potatoes and onions from an essential food item list. So
as an Irishman, potatoes need to be essential food.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, I'm no farmer, but I know from hearing people who have grown food and even playing video games and shit, potatoes are super easy to grow. They are calorie dense for how much water they consume. They
can make them a ton of different ways.
Yeah, I don't get how those aren't essential if nourishment's an issue in your country. Yeah. So that was just weird to me.
You can grow them in a bucket.
Yeah, I mean, it was really odd because it's these won't be subsidized, and it's all right, well. So you're basically taking off the table. So what you're doing when you're telling these farmers that some of these staple foods, I think one of the other ones was cereals, which would mean
grains,
any grain, basically corn or wheat.
Yeah.
And it's okay, you're basically trying to shift the market into a place where you're saying these aren't considered essential anymore and they won't qualify for the highest level of percentage that you would recoup if your crop failed growing these things.
Yeah.
So you're actually, with your policy, disincentivizing people from growing things that are the easiest to grow. And from what I saw, a lot of the speculation amongst their more left-wing media, they're speculating that that's because that's what a lot of these huge agro companies, these multinationals that want to come in, they want to do the same things that they do, in America, for example.
Monsanto circling the wagon.
They want you to grow corn for fuel, baby, or corn syrup. That's what a lot of them are afraid of, and I completely sympathize with that because it's dude, that happened in America. That's happening everywhere around the world, and you want to talk about issues like food quality and malnourishment. If there's going to be giant contracts where, you're going to have the ability to just tell however a giant chunk of farmers in the country, you're growing fuel now.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Right.
that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, maybe it would help on the poverty end. And then, with entering the World Trade Organization, maybe Modi can import some food, but I'm not, I don't think that that's a good play either. No, importing food basically breaks down to, if you're not going to grow some of these essential crops, what you're talking about is, bringing in canned goods for the most part.
But it also wouldn't make sense to me anyway, in an economy that is already heavily set up for agriculture to even have to look to import that much.
Right.
There has to be, if they are going to try and make reforms to how things are done right now, it has to be kind of incremental, because you talk about the poverty rates, hunger, starvation, all of that. That's, these are not rich farmers to begin with.
Right.
So by doing something as drastic of these new laws, it's just a recipe for disaster. And I think there'll be some movement on it. I think it's just too many people. It's too disruptive for Modi, and he's going to have to try and figure something out.
And he's definitely facing a ton of external pressure. I mean, I've read a bunch of the press statements from a ton of UK countries, America, Justin Trudeau in Canada, everybody, because the real thing is, like, he messed up. He lost the PR battle already. I got right here, he recently cracked down on the farmers' protest, arresting their leaders, blocking internet access at protest points.
That was a crazy move.
Yeah, I mean, he pulled to China, folks. Like, there's no way you come out of that PR hit positive. Like, if you shut the internet off in your country, you're the devil to everyone immediately. Everyone loves the internet. First of all, like, even if you weren't protesting and you just lived there and your fucking internet went out.
No, those call centers over there, what are they going to do?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, just think of how, and I get it. Like, it's not like, obviously it's not, a baton to the face or whatever, but that's an ominous thing to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, for the people who live there,
it's a telling act, right?
Yeah, it's them showing, like, look what I can do.
Yeah,
it's a real flex.
Yeah.
And then, not to mention, he's been prosecuting journalists and arresting them too that have unfavorable coverage of him and BJP. So yeah, he's not going to come out of this unscathed. He's certainly going to have to do some sort of a heel turn or bring these people to the table to negotiate at some point. There's no way he's going to be able to just be like, I'm not changing anything.
But in saying all this and everything that we talked through, he has a ton of support still.
Sure. But the farmers are gaining more and more.
They are. So, there's something's got to give.
People in the streets throwing flowers to them as they walk by, giving them food. A lot of these farmers have actually been just sleeping outside in the cold. From all the reports I've seen, 4 months now.
Yeah.
So, and it's actually gaining more and more traction amongst the people that they physically come in contact with, who they're protesting in their areas. There's a lot of sympathy for the city folk, that the city folk have for these folks, because I think they understand. Even if they, might have some political, because that's the interesting thing, right? That's always the threat of, you have a guy like Modi who he rises in popularity largely because of the cultural aspects of the politics. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to, like, this type of, as you would say, meat and potatoes, economics issues, it's kind of hard to, like, disagree with your country's farmers.
Yeah.
It's a pretty hard bend to make. Yeah.
And as I said, when farmers want to jam up the streets, they got the tractors and machinery to do so. Yep. You see that everywhere. So, it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, because India are integral to a lot of politics that goes on over there. They also have the dynamic of being, they have a hot topic in the Kashmir thing that's going on now, where they're fighting with Pakistan over that contested area. And it's just such a big economy. Such an incredible amount of people.
A ton of potential, just like Brazil. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they did do that. Brazil opened up, Bolsonaro, they certainly opened up for corporations, and it's not that it's
for the worse.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's the thing. It's not an inherently bad thing. It's a matter of, who's at the table when these things happen.
Well, you open up a whole can of worms and then trying to figure out how to regulate those corporations. It's one thing allowing them to be involved in it and like bringing them in as part of the game, but I don't have a ton of faith in Bolsonaro and the Brazilian government, regulating those people correctly, and the same in India. Right. I just think you're dealing with, when you bring that in, you're dealing with a ton of influence and power that doesn't always have to be visible for the rest of the world to see. And which was a point that I brought up to you, is that he did skip that step, Modi, in putting it, given the opportunity for corporations to get right in on it. Was there influence behind the scenes on Modi to allow this to happen? Perhaps. Is he foreseeing kickbacks or revenue coming from this? I'm sure. I mean, that's ultimately a reason behind it, but,
or at the very least, people in his party who were positioned to profit from it. I mean, that the political corruption is not unique to America, folks.
It's right
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why a lot of people get into politics.
Yeah. I would argue most.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that kind of gives the wrap up of that, and there'll be something to look out for. Definitely, some good places, and I'm going to continue to do this as we chat on these topics. Is a good place to find information on that is don't just go to your, regular outlets such as, CNN, even The Guardian and stuff. Get on to sites like Al Jazeera, even Indian.
Yeah, a ton of the research I did for this topic in this episode was actual Indian journalists. In country.
And it's not like the articles are in India. These are people. India, has a ton of English-speaking, eloquent writers there who can really break it down from us and give us a first-hand account of what's going on over there.
Yeah, and unvarnished one too, because it's not tainted by the opinion of the West that exists prior to the journalist even writing the article.
Exactly. So yeah, I would definitely encourage anybody who's interested in the topic to go and seek out some good, like I said, Al Jazeera had a great article on it that really broke it down, unbiased, in my opinion. But I guess the most important topic of the week is about a little game that is tomorrow.
the big game.
The big game.
You can't say SUPER.
The pigskin. The pigskin. So, full disclosure, I am a New England Patriots fan. And as I was telling you, I've been a Patriots fan before they were, ever big. Ramon is a San Francisco 49ers fan. We know we all have our problems.
You?
My heart is saying Tom Brady as well as my head, because he's been here before. He's not in his prime, but I mean, he's in the dance again. So I'm going to throw a bet on the Tampa Bay Bucks in winning against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs.
Bucks getting 3.5 points.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good bet right there.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Me personally, I don't see, unless the Bucks have a perfect defensive game, you can't cover the Chiefs' offense effectively. And I don't know, man. I think Mahomes is going to pull off another one. I'm biased because I hate Tom Brady, so I want to see him lose. I got Joe Montana's my boy. I don't want to see Tom Brady stacking more rings on him.
He's already passed him.
Yeah, no, he is. But I'm saying even more. But that's my pick. I like the Chiefs.
You got a score prediction?
Well, I think, what is the over-under, like 56 and a half or something like that? I can see, I think it's going to be like 34 to like 27 or something like that.
It's going to be a shootout.
It's going to be a shootout. I think it's going to pass the over-under. It's going to be 60-point or higher game.
Yeah, I think it'll go over that too. But I think the lower the score will favor Brady.
Right. Yeah.
It'll certainly favor Brady. Weird dynamic thrown into it. I don't know if you saw the news on Andy Reid's son, the linebacker coach. Did you see that?
Oh, was that the guy that was in the accident?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there an update on that? I saw there was
he won't be a
huge accident.
Yeah, I think there was 2 kids involved in it. Two children. I think a couple of them are in critical, or one of them is in critical. I don't know, but he had. I'm not trying to slander anyone, but I heard that there was alcohol involved.
Okay.
I don't know if he had one drink, whether he was over the limit or not, but
I just saw it was like a multi-car accident. So
it was 2 cars were pulled off, and he was, I think, coming off or on the on-ramp.
Oh, okay.
And just careened into him.
Yeah, I didn't know it was his son. I just saw it was the outside linebacker coach.
Yeah. Which I don't know how that affects the mood of the team. Could be another reason why I was almost going to say the Patriots. We're so used to being in it,
Oh man!
But yeah, let's go. TB12, the greatest ever.
I'm not gonna. Like I said, I don't like dynasties, folks. That's my main thing. So like, I want Tom Brady to lose, but I also don't want to see Mahomes be like win 5 Super Bowls in his first 7 seasons either.
I mean, he's incredible.
Yeah, he is. I don't get me wrong. I don't knock the talent. This is me respecting the enemy. Right. I just,
So does a win for Tom Brady cement him at the top of the athlete totem pole?
And team sports, certainly. Yeah, I don't see how you could deny it. Even me, who dislikes him.
What was that crazy stat? He's won, or he's been in like 40% of the Super Bowls that he could be in, or something. Since he entered the league?
I think it's more than that, because this is his 10th Super Bowl, right? And he's been in the league for, well, wait, how old? Oh, yeah, you're right. It would be probably somewhere in the 40s, yeah. Because he's been in the league over 20 years.
That's insane. And football, there's been a lot of parity in football. Like teams have been consistently across the league. You know, it's tough to win consistently.
Yeah.
You know, every year. Not to mention the amount of Super Bowls he's gone to, but the amount of times he's been to the playoffs.
Right.
And this is a proven point as well for him to say, I can do it without Belichick.
Right. And then, and that's another thing. Like, I'm no New England or Brady fan, but Belichick's been getting disrespected this year, bro. Like, give the man some credit. He is a defensive mastermind. I mean, people been shitting on him. Yeah. Like, oh, look how bad you did.
Those people are idiots.
He had broken arm Cam Newton all year. Okay. Yeah. I called that shit way early in the year. Yeah. I thought about picking him up in fantasy because I was like, hopefully he'll run because he's got noodle arm. But no, he didn't do none of that. Belichick had nothing to work with. That was a Moneyball team this year. They had nothing. So we'll see. Hopefully, I'm hopeful that the Niners look like they want to deal Garoppolo. Yeah. Send him right back to New England, baby. Send him back.
You don't like Garoppolo?
No, Garoppolo. Listen, he's for the money. No, for the money, no, because he's gonna cripple our cap space going forward here. I think we owe him like something like $30 million or something this year. It's incredible. It's too much for a guy who, if you're gonna have a team that runs like that, then why are you paying your quarterback like that? Like, I'd rather just. You draft somebody or pick up anyone who's comparable because it's not like he's like lost games for the Niners, but he
hasn't won enough.
He's not winning them. Yeah. So, that's my thing. For that money, no.
He has to be able to pick the team up by the bootstraps for that money.
And there's weapons now, so there's no excuse.
The NFC is so tough too.
Yeah, well, not this year.
No,
but
not this year. But typically,
well, the NFC West is certainly. What's his name? Matt Stafford's on the Rams now.
Ooh, that's crazy.
Another person getting wild disrespect. People like, this was a horrible trade. Matt Stafford's never done anything. Blah blah blah. So then the team he was on,
they didn't win a game.
You know how many comeback wins that guy had on that team? Are you fucking kidding? Yeah. He's gonna do great in the LA. I'm super pissed.
That's a good setup for him. A good coach, a great coach.
Yep, great coach. He's got plenty of weapons. Kupp, Robert Woods, the run game, Cam Akers, the rookie coming in at the end of the year. Yeah.
No, it's gonna be. Well, let's get over Sunday. I think. Me as a Patriots fan, I really don't know what's going to happen next year. I have no sort of expectations at all, but in Bill, I trust, I swear. And just good management all around. It's just a good organization. So from a personal standpoint, I'll cross that bridge when we get there. Cam Newton, hit or miss. He's obviously had a up and down year, majority down.
Yeah.
You got any dip or special dish you're making for Super Bowl tomorrow, or what are you drinking?
No, I'll probably just classic Heinekens. That's how me and my dad roll. It'll be just him, my mom, my brother, and my family, obviously. Just some wings, taco dip, some jalapeno poppers, maybe. We're gonna keep it pretty light.
Let's plan for the next podcast. We'll talk about some of the commercials. That's always fun.
Oh yeah, that's
from
great.
What I've been reading. You'll have your mix of obviously hilarious ones, but there'll be a big focus on some social change commercials as well, like they normally do.
Yeah, we get
that soft music playing.
Yeah, corporate America, we get it.
Yeah, right, you're trying to do something.
Yeah, we get it. Please just stop. Go back to just spending, $30 million on a Super Bowl ad just to put your bag of chips up.
Is it the Weeknd is the performer?
Yeah, I saw actually that he's spending a ton of his own money or something. He spent $8 million or $7 million of his own money to have creative control over it. Really weird. I've never heard of anything like that.
So he's going to do something crazy.
He said a statement. He was like, "Listen, I'm going to keep it PG." But so he's obviously planning something.
That's funny. He was tight that he didn't get a Grammy nomination.
I saw that. I listened to the album. It was okay. It was two really good songs. That was.
What album I just listened to? And then we'll sign off, I promise, is Jack Harlow's album. It's actually quite good. I don't know if you know that guy.
I've never heard of him, no.
Check it out.
Jack Harlow.
Giving you the plug, Jack. You can sponsor the podcast.
I've been looking for new music, so I'll plug it.
Yeah, check it out. He's a white boy rapper.
Is it on Spotify?
Yep.
All right, I'll check it out. Jack Harlow, folks. Yep.
Might even use it as the outro music,
All right. Get some licensing.
There we go. All right, well, this was fun. We're obviously going to continue to do this. We're going to talk about a wide range of topics that are going to affect, you, the listeners, but, society and globally, things that are popping up and that are pertinent to the conversation that we have. So thanks for listening. Certainly we're looking for more people to follow us, share the content, ask us questions, ask us about topics. Ramon and myself are, delving into these topics, week in, week out, doing the research. And we appreciate all the love and the feedback that we get on that. So that's it from us. Ramon, anything to say before we sign off? Go Pats, no?
No, go Pats. My name is Ramon Mile, and thank you for listening, folks.
Cheers, lads.